Ujjayi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Sunnyside podcast. My name is Giziribtah, and I'm here with
Nehez Meniooh.
We are very honored to have you all here with us today. We are about to wrap up a series that we started about a month or so ago, maybe longer.
A little longer than that.
And it's on really protecting the community, community defense. We've had a number of guests that have been just very insightful in showing us the things that we can be doing in our communities to bring protection, bring community, bring harmony within the communities that we live in and the ones that we reside. So oftentimes we are enclosed in our own spaces and really hiding from all of the troubles and challenges that we see outside of our windows and doors. But we do have, fortunately, organizations and people who are really trying to make a difference within their own respective areas, neck of the woods, to bring some stability and harmonization for ourselves and our families, our children, and even our grandparents. So we have two very insightful guests for you today who are from the Institute of Nonviolence in Chicago, and we're honored to have them, and we're looking forward to chatting with them about what they're doing in the Chicagoland community.
Yeah, definitely. Really, this series has been a lot about just those with the courage, with the willingness to take responsibility for trying to make their community better, trying to make their community safer. And as always, on the Sunnyside, we are trying to shed light on them and kind of bring some positivity to you, to kind of break the desperation, the feeling of desperation, the feeling of discouragement, because the media can just paint such a picture. I mean, I don't want to keep saying it, but the media can paint a picture. Even talking to the sister that we're going to have on, she was explaining that Chicago's not even in the top 10 cities, 20 cities for violence, for inner city violence. But the media will have you think like Chicago's #1 in the world. So it's just very important. You know, we say time and time again, the lie is close. The truth you have to go looking for. You have to investigate. And we are here at the Sunnyside podcast to really assist, because we can only assist in that investigation. We can only assist with the efforts in that investigation, but it's really on each and every serious person, serious about our lives, to put the effort forth to investigate, to find out the truth about the things that are influencing, impacting, even controlling some of the aspects of our lives. Because if we just sit back and we let somebody else tell us, we're never going to get the story. And so today we have two more guests that are investing their energies into making sure that they can transform their communities and make them safer places for not just themselves, but their neighbors, their community, their family members. So it will be a good show.
And we also want to encourage each of us to see how we can get involved, because it's one thing to see what's happening around us or read about what's happening around us, but actually getting involved, rolling up your sleeves, putting on your boots, and getting out there and making a difference in whatever capacity that you can make a difference as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Here we go.
Let's get to it.
Chicago, Chicago, that toddling town, Chicago, Chicago, I'll show you around.
The corner was our magic, our music, our politics. Fires raised as tribal dances and war cries broke out on different corners. Power to the people.
If you don't know by now, I'm talking about Shot-Town. Ain't just say Shot City, Shot City.
So welcome everyone. We are here with members of the Institute of Nonviolence Chicago. We are pleased to have them. I want to go around and have each of you introduce yourself. Tell me your name, how long you've been with the Institute, and then we'll go from there.
All right, so I guess I'll start. My name is Orion Meadows. I am the nonviolence trainer. I teach Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence, and I have been with the Institute, it'll be 2 years, June 27th.
Oh, wow. Okay. June 27th, that's Zephyr's birthday.
Mm. Hi, my name is Shunda Collins. I serve as our lead for development and communication. So I've started about 6 months ago. So I'm brand new, learning just as much as you all might be learning today.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a pleasure to have both of you. We more than pleased to have you during our series on protecting our communities, fighting violence. How did you become interested in that, in really standing up for the community, taking responsibility for trying to change, how the destruction, self-destruction that we see kind of eating up communities in the United States?
You want to go first?
Sure. So my family is from the Austin area, which is on the west side of the city. Mm-hmm. Both sides of my family come from that neighborhood. And so although I wasn't born there, I still have family there. We would frequent there often. And there have been stories about, safety concerns, violence. That, of course, with having family there, it's close to home. I also have family on the south side, and had a few family members that were killed. I had a cousin that I was very close with who was killed, not to gun violence, but during a robbery in the South Shore area a few years. Gosh, that was about 14 years ago now. But that's when I was just starting to get into community service and human service work. I was at an agency at the time where, we worked in that area, as well as others around the city. And so I was about 3 weeks in, and then this happens. And so it really just pushed me even further into wanting to commit to doing work around social services, violence, nonviolence, and just finding solutions for our city. I mean, this was the person who killed my cousin, who was late 30s at the time. The young person was 18 years old. And again, my cousin stepped in as in the middle of the robbery, so right outside of his building, and tried to stop the young man. And of course, he ended up attacking him.
Wow.
So just to think about, the mindset of our youth and what their needs are and why they're resorting to things like this. That's really propelled me throughout my career, and also wanting a safer environment for my own kids. I have two young ones, and I love this city and want them to be able to experience all parts of it. And so doing that in the safest capacity. I mean, going to visit our family in different areas, I don't want to have any concerns about that, and I don't want to have any concerns about them there either. My great grandmother is 100 years old. She turned 100 last year. And so
congratulations to her.
yes, it's such a blessing. And we want her to continue living, and thank God that she has had a full life and has had, protection throughout her life to get to this point, living in that same area. And we want to continue that, right?
What about you?
So for myself, I grew up in the Auburn Gresham community. I was gang affiliated. So I ended up going to prison, and that's where I became a little more self-aware. And so for me, I started there, educating myself, and once I got out, even before I got out, I said I wanted to make a difference. I didn't know in what capacity that would be.
Yeah.
But when I got out, I was in a reentry program by Professor Benny Lee, and he's the founder of it. And so I hadn't even heard of the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago at the time. Never heard of him. But I was at his reentry program, and he was actually the lead trainer at the time at the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. And I didn't even have a job. I was selling my poetry books. Okay. Right.
That you started making it inside?
Yeah. So I was out maybe 3 months out. And so I had watched the Interrupters while I was in prison. And, I saw those guys on there. And so I was telling Professor Lee, like, hey, I need something to do. And he said, well, I'm going to Kenosha, Wisconsin with T.O. Hardeman. And we're going to be doing a training twice a week for a month with some of the organizers and the police department in Kenosha. He said, you're welcome to come with me. And so I was like, hey, I'm with it. So I went up there, and that's when I was first introduced to Kingian Nonviolence as a philosophy. Now, I read King, I knew about King, but I didn't know that it was an actual philosophy that was being taught. So I was introduced to that because they were doing like a collaborative training between the Violence Interrupters, T.O. Hardeman, and Professor Lee.
How old were you at the time?
Well, this was just like 3 years ago. This was just like a little bit over 3 years ago, because I've been out 3 years now. So we were up there, and that's when, because of the Jacob Blake incident, that's why they were doing that. They had asked for Mr. Hardeman and Professor Lee to come up there and to do a collaborative training with the police department and the organizers, which were they were called K-Corps in Kenosha. So I went up there, and then being part of that reentry organization that Professor Lee founded, I would travel with him. And I remember as I was traveling with him throughout Chicago, he would take me to different sites, and he was like, oh yeah, that's the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. And I remember some of the things that he was teaching during the training up there in Kenosha. And then he pointed to our executive director, Teny Gross. And he was like, yeah, that's the founder, or that's the director of Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. I thought he was a priest or a rabbi, a white guy, priest or rabbi. I was like, okay, whatever, so that was kind of like my introduction to this work. And at the time, I didn't know, right? Like I said, I didn't have a job, but I didn't know that I would actually be working for the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. So,
but now, when you say you went with Dr. Lee and T.O. Hardeman, Dr. Lee was using Kingian Nonviolence here at the Institute.
Right. He was the trainer. He was the trainer. He just retired last year from the Institute. So he was the trainer and the nonviolence trainer, and I was a part of his reentry organization called the National Alliance for the Empowerment of Formerly Incarcerated. So when I came out, I was introduced to Professor Lee, and then, as I said, I was just fresh out, and I was accompanying him, and then he said, hey, you can go up there with me, and T.O. Hardeman, we're going up to Kenosha, and everything was kind of like surreal because I had seen the Violence Interrupters, the Interrupters documentary with T.O. Hardeman and Amina on there, and then I actually met them because Amina had come up there while I was there, right? Wow. So it was surreal for me, but then also the whole Jacob Blake incident I had seen while I was still incarcerated on the news. So for me to actually be up there in Kenosha and then to meet Mr. Hardeman and then meet Amina, all of that, and I had just gotten out, right? It was very surreal for me. Right. So I look at it as being kind of like the serendipity, just to even have me in those spaces and then to be where I am now, right?
Interesting. And Kingian Nonviolence is a core aspect of the Institute of Nonviolence, right? And can you say a little more about the Institute itself? How long has it been around? How did it really come about? How did it adopt this, King's philosophy in combating violence?
Mm-hmm.
So, Kingian Nonviolence is the foundation of the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. Now, I guess you could say our sister organization is in Providence, Rhode Island. Okay. Right.
What is your sister organization?
Nonviolence Institute. They call it, it's Nonviolence Institute, and it's in Providence. And so our executive director, he came from Providence. He was doing outreach work in Providence, Rhode Island, and then he brought the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago here, and it's based on the same thing, the principles and the steps of Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence. And so that's how it got started here. It was brought from there.
That was 2015.
Okay.
Now, are these programs that are part of the reentry program, or are they also part of programs that are also held while incarcerated?
So most are part of programming after, so it is part of reentry, and it's not exclusive to reentry either. So we do outreach in the community as a preventative measure as well, and build relationships with folks in the communities that we serve, which right now we serve Austin and West Garfield Park on the west side, and the back of the yards and Brighton Park on the south side. And we do outreach in all four of those neighborhoods. And so we offer this as a measure to make changes around the choice of gun violence or violence in general. So as we're building relationship with folks, we're inviting them in to take the class, the nonviolence training that Orion facilitates, but we also embed the training into our other programs. So we embed it into our reentry programs, we embed it into our workforce programs as well. And in addition to that, we're also expanding out to offer this outside of our organization. So folks are coming to us to do this training in the corporate world now too.
Right. But what's really interesting to me about that, though, is because, growing up in America, learning about Dr. King every February, growing up in school, his philosophy of nonviolence, seemingly, the way I understood it, was really about getting social change and fighting, oppression and things like that. But you guys, the Institute is specifically using it against gun violence and violence we see in our communities, which is not necessarily something he was attacking if it wasn't like, coming from maybe white America or systemic racism, right? How is it that kind of, where's the origin point of it being used for that?
So, okay, here's the thing. With our outreach and with our other departments, victim services and so forth, we bring the people from the community in, and then we introduce them and expose them to Kingian nonviolence as a way of life. Because with Kingian nonviolence, we make a distinction between what we call non-dash violence and non-violence. And the dash being more something that's regulated, but non-violence being a way of life. So, for instance, let's say I mediate or someone mediates the conflict between two different factions. You've only prevented it or interrupted the violence for that moment.
Right.
But if you haven't given them something, a foundation, a solid foundation for which to live by, then they will find themselves, or they can find themselves back in that situation, or in one that's even worse. And so that's how, that's the way the Kingian nonviolence works as a way of life, because it's transformative. So that would be the way that it would work, even when you're dealing with any form of violence, because it's a way of life. And so for me, what I try to do is I try to get them to explore the nuances of violence. And so you were saying that obviously, like with mass incarceration and gun violence as we know it today, those things didn't exist as a problem on the level that they do now when Dr. King was alive.
Right.
But it's addressing the nuances of violence and even the internal violence that Dr. King talks about, which is principle number 5, right? To avoid internal violence of the spirit as well as external physical violence. And so it is that internal violence of the spirit that plagues us so much in our world today. For instance, road rage, right? When we're talking about even with white supremacy and those groups, that the fear, the internal violence that ends up becoming external violence. So looking at that and exploring that, if we can deal with that, right? If we can explore that and start dealing with that, then a lot of the issues that are plaguing us right now with violence in our city and beyond, that we could start to find ways to remedy that. But it's the internal violence that's just the most important. And so by having a way of life, then you begin to start to, it becomes alchemical.
And to your point, we do advocacy around this as it relates to with elected officials, with the police, and then there is a larger network, or what we call civilian architecture, that has come together around these concepts. Really, it's the industry or the field or the concept of community violence intervention, CVI. But within that, we have brought that philosophy of Kingian nonviolence, and that has been part of really the success and expansion, not just with the community, but also exposing the different sectors or different entities to this as well, because it is a systemic issue. We do recognize that, there's so much that we can do in terms of making sure the cognitively or mindset, we're working to expose people to make different decisions or gain self-awareness. And there's also work that needs to be done for the systemic situation that they're in, and making sure that there's access to other choices. So yes, we are also, to your point, addressing that issue, and even the response or the perception of the police to the communities that we serve. So we don't have any official affiliation or partnership with the police, right? But we do offer, the understanding of where we can play a part and fill in the gaps to de-escalate or to even just change the perception about people in the community. So yes, that work is being done as well.
And to add to that, so our staff they get trained in Kingian nonviolence, right? And it's periodically, because it's a way of life, and so it has to be refreshing as they go out and do the work.
Yep, and if I can add really quick too, we have our victim services team that has built both a relationship with the community and the police to where we're on site within an hour of any incident that happens within our areas. So we've kind of built that rapport so that they know that we're there as a resource and a support to the situation, and even to kind of curb any intimidation that folks may feel with the presence of the police. We're there to help to kind of mediate that on site.
Yeah, I did want to just kind of know what that looks like for you all on a day-to-day basis, because we are familiar with the nonviolence, the intervention organization that we talked about, but what does your organization look like on a day-to-day basis in interacting with community, interacting with the police, interacting with the people who are victims of these types of circumstances? How does that look?
So I know we actually had a participant that he was a victim. He was of a shooting. He was an innocent bystander. And so what happened was, after he had been shot, our team, our victim services team, went to him and asked him, did he want our help and want our resources? And so then we brought him in. He became part of our program, and then even after he had finished our program, he continued to come by, and he it was a place for him to be able to have some type of stability and to get away from a lot of the problems that were going on in the community, and it was a safe space for him. What happened was, and he was there for a long time. We had, I don't, because he was homeless.
Okay.
He was homeless at the time when he had gotten shot, and so that was an example of our team, one of our departments, going out and being able to assist someone that had been a victim of a violent crime in the community, and then bringing him in and exposing them to or introducing them to Kingian Nonviolence, but also provide some of our resources. And he was a participant in some of our programs. He went on some of our service trips last year.
Okay.
So that's like the day in the life of somebody who comes through our doors. Usually, or we have 6 departments, if you will. Yeah. So there's outreach. So that's the canvassing team. That's the team that's going out doing the direct interaction with the community. Okay. And that's usually considered more preventative. But who we're really looking for, although we serve the whole entire community, who we're really looking to connect with most is those who are most likely to be shot or to be a shooter. How
do you find them?
The thing about our staff is that most of them are from the community. So that's helpful in identifying folks and where they come from and having that long-standing history and community connection. So that it's not from a profiling perspective. We're not going out looking for who looks like they may be. It's more so, again, we're looking to gather information to support. And we're going out to build relationships and see what the needs are. And then from there, we're assessing based on what happens in specific areas. So there's considered hot spots around the areas, around the blocks that, this block is considered hot. And that's where we kind of tend to keep eyes on to, again, offer other solutions, to understand the relationship between the different cliques, or the conflict between the different cliques in the area. So, for example, with Austin, there's 52. And so trying to connect with all of them, to understand what their needs are, to understand, what their goals are, even in a sense, and then from there seeing how we can help mediate when there is conflict, or to avoid conflict.
But the outreach is bringing the clique into like a program, or are you dealing with individuals?
Individuals, usually. That's kind of the front lines, the front door, if you will. And then we have our victim services department. And so when there is an incident, that's the team that's going out on site, either at the scene or, when we can, into the hospital, or following up with folks after there's an incident to offer different resources. It may be legal support, it may be funeral support, different things like that. It could be just groceries for the day. So we do what we can in that capacity. And then if it's and then we also help with with regard to retaliation and trying to, reduce any opportunity for retaliation if, that's how the conflict arose or that's how the incident arose. We also have, as a, part of those supports that we provide, there's some that are in external referrals, like I mentioned, like the legal services and things like that. But then there's also internal services, which focus around our workforce, workforce development programs. So we do different trainings around resume building, different skills, soft skills. And then as a part of that, we have the nonviolence trainings, and then same for the reentry. Yep. So with all of those, if there's some long-term support that's needed, we also have a case management department who helps with those long-term goals or solutions that are needed. And lastly, and this is pretty new and becoming really just a part of the success that we're seeing, is we are offering behavioral health and wellness services. So, all of the neighborhoods that we serve have experienced trauma. Every single person there in some capacity has experienced trauma. And so the behavioral health and wellness department, they do cognitive behavioral intervention, again, with the folks who are most likely to retaliate or to be a shooter, or really anyone who wants the service. And then we also provide one-on-one counseling. We have a partnership with Rush. And we provide that one-on-one support too for people. It's taken a while. I mean, there's definitely still a stigma attached to therapy and counseling in the neighborhoods, but we're getting traction on it. And we see it more than anything. We see it helping with our own staff. So like I said, a lot of our staff come from the neighborhoods that we serve. So they have that same experience, right? So then, what is that like, being a victim advocate or being an outreach advocate, and you're going through those same loops of trauma as you hear other people's stories, right? So we take it very seriously in terms of making sure our staff have that support as well in-house. And so that's where we've seen the biggest change in the culture of our organization because of that.
Nice. And about how big is your staff that we're talking about?
We have about 120 right now.
Okay.
And so pulling from that demographic is important. When we're talking about what Dr. King and the three evils that he identified of racism, poverty, and militarism, right? You definitely need to have those relationships in the community to be able to go out and speak to those people and to be able to mediate the conflict. But also what it does is it provides economic opportunities by having those jobs, right? Pulling from that demographic of people who are formerly incarcerated and who used to be affiliated. And so with it being successful, what it does is it reduces recidivism, right, by being successful. And what that does is it counters the violence of mass incarceration, right, by providing economic stability in the community and having those jobs. And so that's why this is very important work, because what it's doing is it's allowing those communities that have been negatively impacted by mass incarceration and by the epidemic of drugs in our community, and it's empowering them.
Yep. So we do pay a stipend for the trainings, as well as for people to become what we call flip workers. So there's people outside of our staff who are our eyes and ears on the street, kind of extension of our outreach team, who we provide stipend to them to basically keep their block safe. It's like somewhat like a block club, but that's also been a huge help with the youth in the communities we're in.
And is it receptive to the older people as well as the youth, because we also notice or see that there's like an uptick in violence amongst our young people before they get to prison, before they get to juvenile detention centers and the like, trying to impart on them a different way of approaching life. If we can capture that in those ages, it almost seems like that sensitive age before high school, but maybe in that 12, 13.
So to speak to that, because when people think of violence, they think about the youth, but like our programs really are for adults. And Frederick Douglass had a saying that it is easier to build to build strong men, or it's easier to build youth than to repair broken men, right? And so that is the task that we have taken upon, is to build a broken adult. Because here's the thing, right? You can have the young people in these programs, and you could try to teach them, instill certain principles and values and things in them, and so forth. But what happens when they go home to those broken adults, right? A lot of that is going to be undone. And so we don't have any programs specifically directed towards the youth. Our programs are more geared towards the broken adults, because there's, you know, a lot of violence that actually takes place among adults. And so it seems as though, or people try to emphasize what the youth are doing, but we have a lot of adults. And I know this, and I actually reside outside of Chicago in the south suburbs, but I see more violence among adults than I do youth, actually.
And the youth tend to just reflect what the adults are giving them, what they've taught them,
100%.
how they brought them up, the violence that they passed down for them to inherit.
And we've experienced challenges around getting in front of them because of the our staff. A lot of them have been justice involved in some way, so we've experienced some challenges getting into the schools because of that, because of the restrictions on who can and cannot be in certain spaces. So that has been presented there. That is presenting a challenge for us that we've been, advocating for with the city, to see if there's anything we can do around that. But yes, like he's saying, like if we don't, we got to start with the leadership in the homes as well.
I'm a student of philosophy, so I want to ask a question about King and Kingian nonviolence, because too often we let media kind of inform us about our own culture here in Black America specifically. And when you think of the King that the media presents us, he's kind of, he's even written off as kind of like, I don't want to say a sucker, but a sucker, right? But you see his philosophy being very useful for transforming even the hardest of communities. And I know you actually teach about that philosophy. So can you tell us a little more about that? You don't necessarily have to open up a full class on it, but really kind of just break that, first of all, break that misrepresentation of King that we so often get in school lessons and on media, and then really how, because the brother was very deep. Right. Just kind of explain that.
Yeah, and that's a task that I have, right? It's a challenge that I have for a lot of our, even some of our, staff members that have, come up in the streets, right? That they want to make a difference in the community, but then sometimes it's, with King.
Yeah, not with that.
Right, yeah, most of them say, well, Malcolm, but not necessarily King, right? But King was a very radical person. It's not presented as that, but we, if you have studied King and you know the history, you know that he was not liked. He was considered a rabble rouser. So our first principle, nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. Right, that's principle number one. So what does that look like? What does that mean? And it took courage
Right.
To be able to walk into an environment knowing that you could possibly be killed, right? And so that's something that I use to present to people in the community when I'm teaching them, to show them that it took a whole lot of courage, because I get this all the time, like, you know, and you've probably seen the people post that, I'm not like my ancestors, you can get these hands. But it takes much more strength, willpower to walk into a situation knowing that it's very hostile, and to go against human instinct, which is to, when you're under the threat,
react,
right, of being harmed, is to either run or to fight. Takes much more willpower to be able to do that. And so I try to get them to understand that, and then also teaching it in its proper historical context. And it's, a lot of people it's not presented to them in the proper historical context of what King was going up against and why he was doing it. So for me, it's just getting them to understand that, opening that up to them. And then once they're able to see that, then they become more receptive of it. But because he hasn't been taught properly in depth in the proper historical context, our people look at them as being passive and being weak. Now with nonviolence training, they had to go through that during that time, right? You had to go through that to prepare you for what you were going to have to face and endure, right? And so I think that once people can understand that and appreciate that, then they are willing to embrace it more. And then once you get them to do that, then they become more receptive to the philosophy and exploring it.
Orion, do you want to talk about, I don't know if you remember when we did the event in January, and it was brought up around the book that we were looking at around about King's life and his experience here in Chicago,
right? And
how that was just vastly different from the South, but almost equally, you know, violent and aggressive, but in a different way, and how that even shaped his idea of the nonviolence philosophy, and how, you know, it really was for the community.
I think what you're talking about, if I can remember what you're saying, like, so when King came here and what he experienced, he was saying that the southern races could learn a thing or two from the races up north, right? What was going on. I think that's what you're referring to a little bit. But like for me, when we're talking about nonviolence in our community in Kingian Nonviolence, for me, I think that when we're talking about the beloved community and coming together and sustaining ourselves, I look at every aspect economically in building the beloved community, and the need for us to come together and working together. I think that King was beginning to work towards that when he was in Memphis, when he was assassinated, when he was down there and he was trying to get together with the union and the workers and so forth. So I think that part is something that is left out when we're talking about King. And then even the war, when we're looking at the war and some similarities that we're seeing even right now in the world today. Like when I think of what's going on all around the world, and then even in our country, I think about King and the stance that he would take. Right. So
now I know I keep bringing you back to origins and the beginning of things, but was there somebody involved in the start of even maybe that Rhode Island sister organization that was working with King, or was it just like people that saw King's philosophy and was like, this is too important to let die with the man? You have to.
It's a great question.
I don't know. I can't. I'm not quite sure. That's something that's a good question to ask.
So what I do know that before Rhode Island started, and our CEO Teny Gross, who started it there in Rhode Island, he was recruited to come to Rhode Island from Boston.
Okay.
So there was based on what was going on at that time in Boston, which I think was the 80s. They were working with a church at the time whose principles aligned in that way. And so I believe it was birthed out of that. Don't quote me. We can cut the tape if we need to. but I can confirm and come back to you. But I believe that's how it started. Our founder was in Boston as an outreach worker to start, and spent several years there, and then had that alignment with the church that then had him recruited to Rhode Island, which then had him recruited here.
Chicago.
And it's taught in several places. Like, it's not just in Providence. It's not just here. I think that some of the family members are even teaching it. King's family members, they teach Kingian Nonviolence. So there are several, organizations in several places where people are actually using Kingian Nonviolence.
And the Selma group came here. They visited with our team a couple months ago too. So they're LA, Houston now. So and we actually, the University of Chicago has a leadership academy trying to help to bring some recognition to community violence intervention, especially as a professional field, if you will. So there is now an even greater focus on it. I think Orion was saying that before. And a lot of that's coming out of what's happening here in Chicago and the success of some of these things. So when Teny came here, our founder, they're just looking at the landscape and how things were kind of siloed. There was an opportunity to bring a lot of these groups together that were doing very similar things, but not just the community groups existing on their own, but also the legislators, the private sector, different groups, to kind of build this architecture around how we're getting to the solutions. And, yes, there's challenges and different interests amongst all the different groups. However, we have definitely seen an impact as it relates to, again, the recognition that there is a way to bring solutions. So that is where we are now, and we're at the point where we are scaling those efforts and have the attention of funders to be able to scale some of those efforts in the communities that need it most right now, the ones that have been most disinvested, like West Garfield or Austin, that has the most volume in terms of violence, or at least one point did. So we're at that point now where we're looking to identify where those needs are. There's been 7 neighborhoods that have been identified, Austin being one, Humboldt Park, West Garfield Park, and a few others. And so, we're being able to give recognition to what is working.
And nonviolence, when you just thinking of nonviolence, the word in itself meaning the negation of, right? The negation of violence. And so exploring what violence is, the nuances of it. And so it's broader, it's deeper than what a lot of people, what they see or what they think when they think of Dr. King and violence. And so what is violence? When I'm doing my trainings, or when I'm speaking to our workforce group, or even sometimes with our staff, I try to get them to explore what that means, right? And violence is anything that causes suffering or harm upon a person or a group of people. And so if I am depriving you of resources or opportunities, that is causing harm upon you. So then when we look at economic violence, when we look at academic violence, what that looks like, right? By not allowing you to have access to education, or even as far as miseducation, right? Misinforming you. That is a form of violence, right? And not something that has just been inflicted upon our people, but also others, people who embrace the ideology of white supremacy. That is academic violence, because it is it's misinformation, miseducation. So I try to get us to look at it in that way as well. And so now, once you understand that, how do we counter that? How do we negate that? Right. So that's my approach when also teaching non-violence.
And how do we properly respond to it? Because I mean, there's a game, right? And we have to learn how to navigate it, or at least understand to the point where our response isn't further perpetuating that we're the problem, right? So that's definitely part of the classes and what Orion teaches. I mean, you know, how do we learn what's really going on here?
And what about for women? We have seen a huge uptick of violence and aggressive behavior amongst young women and women as a collective. Do you have any programs that are targeted or structured, uniquely designed for women?
I wouldn't say uniquely designed. However, we have been engaging with the women facilities, the jail at this point, and maybe not directly supporting them while they're still incarcerated. However, there's a ripple effect when the mother is incarcerated. So how can we continue to support the family on the outside through our outreach and through our victim services departments? That's definitely part of it, and something that we are doing that's more targeted right now. But a specific program for women, not necessarily. And I would say majority men is who we serve. However, there are definitely women in our workforce classes and in the nonviolence training. So we serve the community as a whole.
Yes, yeah. So we don't have like any specific like program for women, but we do have. We partner with what's the group that.
In Austin?
Yes. In
New
Austin.
Moms?
Not New Moms. She's a liaison for the particular group that deals with domestic violence.
Oh. Tip of my tongue.
Yeah, right now.
Well, do you guys observe in your outreach a difference in women being involved more in violence and instigation of violence and things like that, like she's saying? Because we've heard that from other people we had on the podcast, that they're seeing that more and more. That women are being more involved in violence, being more violent, instigating more violence, even when it is between men. Do you also observe that?
Yes, I mean, I observe it. I think that a lot of it comes from like social media today. What's being portrayed out there, what's being put out there. Like for instance, a bad B. Right. So now, how do you define that? What does that look like? Well, someone, and going back to principle number 5, internal violence. Right? And so there's the anger, that internal violence that's in there. Because when you look at what they call, or the definition of a bad B, right? Someone who is willing to get over on somebody, scam someone, whatever it takes to be on top. I'm willing to do that, right? And so by that being portrayed out there in social media and even in the music videos and things like that, right? The music, I think that has the movies, a lot of even with urban novels that are put out, you know, how that's constantly being put out there. I think that has a big impact on what we're seeing now with violence becoming more frequent amongst women. And if you look at how many women are carrying guns today as opposed to back in the day, the need for that, but I think it is a reaction. It's reactionary to what has been occurring in our community for so long. Right. So I think that a lot of that has to do with it, and so people are trying to emulate that in our community now.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to make that separation when, you know, having that skill but not knowing how to tap into it cognitively, right? In terms of how to separate what may be entertainment from me subscribing to this as a way of life, or me, you know, having the pressure to emulate this. And that's, again, part of the cognitive intervention that we do. It's part of the nonviolence training that we do, is to make those, you know, cognitive, self-aware decisions about how you're going to live your life and what the impact of, you know, engaging with certain, you know, content or people or whatever the case may be, and how that will impact you, and having an active choice in that.
And the nonviolence training that you do, I understand it is done with different groups that are in kind of under attack, at risk of entering into violence. It's also done with the staff. It's also done in programs where people seek it out with your organization. Is it also done inside correctional facilities?
So, I mean, I haven't gone inside of a correctional facility myself doing it, but we have a reentry department, and they go in and, you know, they talk about, you know, Kingian Nonviolence. So they haven't done actual trainings, but what they do is they go and they talk about the Institute, and they hold programs in there, and I think they give them a slight introduction to Kingian Nonviolence. But I myself have not gone into a correctional facility or into Cook County Jail teaching or doing a training, right? So I've been inside of, I've actually gone to Stateville, and I've talked about Kingian Nonviolence with some of those guys, but I haven't done an actual training, and so we haven't done I don't think an actual training, unless it was in the past a long time ago with other trainers previously. But since I have been here, we haven't done an actual training in the county jail or in the correctional center.
I see. But when you say you were inside, did you say you experienced Institute of Nonviolence program inside before you got out, or you?
No, I didn't. I hadn't even heard of the Institute of Nonviolence Chicago. You know, I just read a King. You know, I didn't even know. Like, I didn't know it was an actual like organization. Well, even a philosophy, right? I hadn't known that it was a philosophy or an actual system. I just read
until meeting Dr. Lee.
Right, until Professor Lee. And then he did the training, and then I was, like I said, I was accompanying him while I was part of his reentry program. And then, you know, I actually went through the 15-hour training like 3 times myself, just being part of it. And so I was learning. At the time, it was almost like it was inadvertent, but I was kind of like being groomed at the time to become the trainer, right? I was actually, So I started out. I didn't even have a job. I was fresh out of prison, and then I was working at a transitional living center. For about a year, and then I saw that there was a position open for a nonviolence trainer, and I said, hey, you know, I'm familiar with it. I've been around it for a while. Why not, right? And so I applied, and then I ended up here. So I've been here for about 2 years now.
That's great. It's really something to me, because to see the different visionaries that we've had pop up in the communities around America, and then how media is used against them. The system has many tricks, putting them in prison and all of that. And then media really paints a different picture of them. But what they brought, the vision they brought, the philosophy they brought is still living somewhere. It was picked up by family members, and then it's picked up by an organization to still try to keep pushing to make change in our communities with that philosophy. So to see your organization do that, that's really, something to commend. And I want to ask about, because you have mentioned the term beloved community, right. And I see you have the t-shirt. Right. Is that also associated with the Institute?
Yes. So the beloved community that's part of Kingian Nonviolence. We have a beloved community model, right? And it has like 3 aspects and 4 pillars. So the 3 aspects are self. Then the second aspect is relationships, so like your family, close friends, and then it's the community. So it always starts with self, right? It always starts with self, having that self-awareness and self-accountability.
And self-love, I would say too, right? And that self-love and the understanding that I have something that needs to be seen and heard and to share. And
then so you got self, you have relationships or family, and then you have the community. But then also you have so the pillars are educate or education, consolation or console, right? And how do you do it on each level? So how do I educate myself? What does education look like in the household, in the family unit? How does it look like in the community? Right. And also console. We explore that. How do I console myself? Right. How do we go through that process of consoling or grieving within the family? And I also out in the community. Sustain. How do I sustain myself? What does that look like? We explore that. How do we sustain ourselves as a family unit? How do we sustain ourselves as a community? So and then celebration is the 4th one. What does that look like? Now for me, I explore that with them, but then I also look at, are we doing it in a positive and negative way, right? Because sometimes education, and when we talk about social media, right, are we educating ourselves in a positive manner or in a negative manner? Right. How do we grieve? Grieving sometimes is consuming things that aren't good for us, and often grieving could be what we see in our community. For instance, someone gets murdered in the community, right? It's part of a particular faction or whatever. And so now what I do is I go out and I retaliate, right? Because I am grieving the death of a close friend or a family member. So that's not a positive way. So so we all experience these things, but how does it manifest itself in our lives, right? How do I sustain myself? So we obviously, when we talk about food and healthy, way of living, eating to live, but sometimes and because of violence, right? The options that we have in our community, the food that we have in our community, it's been weaponized against us, right? And so looking at that, are we making those, are we making healthy choices when we are consuming things and putting them in our body, right? And then how do we celebrate? Celebrating obviously Juneteenth, things like that. But then also it can become in a negative way, right? When we celebrate, going to certain places that aren't necessarily good for us, and certain activities are going on that aren't, good for us in our community. So that is part of the beloved community model: self, relationship, community, but then those 4 pillars: educate, console, sustain, and celebrate.
And I think about, I told you all about my great grandmother, right? And she's 100 years old. And I feel like before I even came to the Institute, this is the way she lived. This is the philosophy that she's lived. And I feel like this is part of why she's been able to live for so long. And we just want other people in the community to have that opportunity and to have exposure to that way of life, knowing, yes, that there is also the battle of on the other side with the powers that be, or things that may be beyond our control in terms of what's right in front of us. But again, we're advocating on behalf of that as well. But we really do want to see people live longer. The life expectancy between West Garfield and the Gold Coast is like 10 years. The West Garfield Park has the lowest life expectancy, and it's also the most historically disinvested community in the city. So there's a correlation there that is beyond the control of the people who live there. So we are trying to work on both sides. That sense of self, that sense of responsibility to the community, responsibility to self, but then also, what may be beyond the control of an individual, but has to be something that happens collectively once we get to the point of, the beloved community as a whole.
And with Dr. King and the philosophy of nonviolence, when we talk about the beloved community, right? In the spirit of King, because what often happens, and when you were talking about the media and how it portrayed a lot of our people, a lot of our leaders, what they try to do is they try to put them against one another. But if you look at the beloved community, and you look at King as a great leader and philosopher, but you look at other people like Marcus Garvey, Noble Drew Ali, they really were closer to one another than they were apart. When you're talking about the pillars of celebration, education, how do you sustain yourself, right? They were more, they had more similarities than they did differences. And so just emphasizing that, the importance of that, not trying to put one against the other, but just showing those similarities. And so once we can get the community to see that, then I think that embracing Kingian nonviolence, the people become more receptive to that once they see that. And so I try to get people to understand that, because some of our people, when they think of King, they think of a person that was passive, right? And they don't show the King that was considered revolutionary or radical. So I think that that's very important, to paint him in that light and show those correlations.
Yeah, to just break that image that the media gave. And try to get to the real person. Because any real person is going to be multidimensional, have a lot of depth, but especially someone that devotes their life to philosophy and living principle. Because when I hear you talk about nonviolence and even, the pillars of beloved community, all we're talking is principle. And I hear you saying my great grandma lived principle. And now somehow the media has gotten so many of us to belittle a principled life that this man was really trying to lead, and try to contend all of the things we're up against, trying to confront all of the things we're up against by living a principled life. And now it was a talk of nonviolence. And you kind of write it off like that because you really don't understand the depth.
Well, and then it becomes easier to not capture or keep the depth and the uniqueness of our culture in a particular place. So, when we see gentrification happening, it kind of strips the cultural value that was there in that particular community in a lot of cases. And, you do that by distancing people from, the things that we have to celebrate, the things that we, the tools and things that we use to educate. So yeah, that's also part of it. How can we make Austin be economically equal to Oak Park without stripping it of the, the depth and the culture and the uniqueness that comes out of that particular area, or the people that live there, the Black community that lives there.
And what the Institute for Nonviolence is doing is no different than what the principles of Kwanzaa were about. When we talk about collective collective economics, right? Coming together and working with one another, having that unity and taking responsibility and sharing with your neighbor, right? It's no different. This is what we're doing, even though it may not necessarily say it in the same way, but it still has the same goal in getting people to understand that.
I just wanted to make a point about like the whole notion of community. That is something that's so underrated because we oftentimes think about like the big problem in our city is economics. The big problem is disenfranchisement between people that don't have means and resources and the like. But if you think and look at the Black community, we have resources.
Right.
We have the strength of the Black dollar. It's just where we choose to put those resources. And you also have to factor in that if you don't have those principles, you can have all the money in the world, and you see what some of our folks with all the money in the world, what they're doing with it. So it's not necessarily economics, it's those principles, it's that community, and it's that root. If we don't address those types of matters, then we can have all of the things that Oak Park has and all the other great so-called communities have. If we don't have principles, if we don't have community, we don't have those values in place, then it's useless.
Definitely.
So, are there any current activities, programs that people can get involved with at Institute? How do they reach out if they're either looking for assistance from the programs or they are looking for employment? Because I know you said that's a big way even that we contending with violence in our communities by setting people up in a better situation. How do they get in touch?
So our website, nonviolencechicago.org is a way. Then we're on, Facebook. We're on Instagram, so you can go and check out our social media and find us that way. Okay. And then you can actually come to our site, 1856 North LeClaire, 5114 South Elizabeth at Precious Blood. We have an office there, and then 4401 West Madison and West Garfield. You can come to our office and.
We'll be sure to put all of that in the description. But lastly, because you just said Precious Blood, and we were talking about how, what was the founder's name? Gross?
Teny Gross.
Teny Gross started it in church in Boston. But the organization is not really ran by the church. Huh?
No.
Because a lot of times you can see that the legacy of Dr. King, the philosophy, the principles he was really trying to live by is also kind of belittled just under the church. And it's just where you're really kind of taking away this visionary that was getting into radical thought, that was really trying to make social change, organize different factors in the society. And it's just kind of like, the church. So the Institute is not controlled by the church. No,
it's not controlled by the church. And then on a deeper level, right? Let's just be honest, on a deeper level, those principles are principles that go all the way back to the beginning of when man became conscious.
Most definitely.
His self-aware about his being, right?
Definitely.
So it's beyond that, just Dr. King obviously was a Christian minister, but that's just a consequence of us being brought here in the United States in a nation that is a Christian nation, right? That's a Protestant, nation. But those principles transcend that. Definitely. Going all the way back to what we're talking about right now, and actually for our sixth principle is the universe is on the side of justice. And so when we talk about what that means, for me, I give the analogy of mob, with the heart being on the scale weighed against the feather, right? So when I think of the universe is on the side of justice, I actually use that as an analogy when I talk about that with our participants and even our staff when we go through the nonviolence training. So these are principles that transcend that.
I'm glad you said it. I didn't want to say it and take any credit away from King or anything, but I remember talking to a person in a village in Africa and them saying, you guys in America think that started with King, and then they tell you it started with Gandhi, that started with ancient Africa, we read on that. It's just about living principle.
Universal.
You're not gonna give up your destiny to action or reaction, and just getting pulled into anything because your emotions got the best of you. So it's important. It's important.
Just a way to contextualize it for a certain audience. And it also helps to bring the connection to other audiences in a broader way sometimes. But 100%, it goes beyond King, it goes beyond all of us. And as well as your mention of our connection with the church, they're partners of ours that connect on that alignment. We exist as a separate entity. However, we see ourselves as a partner to the community as a whole, and
trying to make positive.
Right, and we see that the church does have a part to play in that because of their existence in the community.
And one of the things that we explore also are the stages of compassion. Right, during our nonviolence training. So if violence is defined as something that causes suffering or harm upon a person or another group of people, then nonviolence would be what? To relieve the suffering of another person or a group of people, right? And that is love, right? That is the fourth stage of compassion. So you have pity, you have sympathy, you have empathy, and then you have the fourth stage, compassion, to love, to act, the act of relieving someone's suffering or harm, which is the opposite or the negation of violence. And that's, like you say, that transcends any religion. It's a way of life, it's a way of being. And sometimes it's just that the different religions or whatever the case may be are just different ways that different groups formulate it. But it's kind of like, I use the analogy of Bruce Lee and water. Water in itself doesn't have any form, but it takes upon the form of any receptacle that you put it in. And so it's the same thing with any religion or any system. The system is the receptacle, right? But love in itself is formless, and so the spirit of nonviolence in itself is formless, but the religion or the system is the receptacle that it takes upon, and the receptacle is these different whatever cultural group decides to formulate it and present it to their people.
Right, it's a point of reference, because until people have a proper pathway to just live in the now and just be, they need a point of reference, and usually that comes from the past or something that is has been understood at a different point in time. But the goal is that will help people, or they'll design a pathway for themselves to become more present with love, with what is right now.
Well, I think that's a good point to end on. I want to thank you both for coming on. Thank you both for having that compassion in your heart to go out and try to affect change in our communities. and transform them into safer places to be, places for us to grow old in and watch our children grow old in. So thank you, and continue doing what you do.
Thank you for what you all do.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as we did. You always learn so much talking to people, you know, doing work in the community, but also just sharing a bit about their life, the way they see things. And you always can learn so much about ourselves, our own community, by really investigating deeper, like I was saying, you know. Because Dr. King is really a very deep figure, historical figure that we don't really see many sides of, even though there's been countless books written about him, you know. And for those of you who do read, maybe you have seen a lot more of what he was really trying to achieve, and even how that was growing over his lifetime. But it was really good having these two on who are more students of his philosophy and even working hard to perpetuate that to transform neighborhoods. And I found it very interesting, not only, you know, nonviolence being a philosophy coming from, you know, traditions, indigenous communities all over, but even the beloved community and the link with the original name for Africa is our beloved land. And I just, you know, was sitting there in silence, finding that interesting inside. So I know you caught that too.
I did. And it's, as you stated, very interesting how that thread just continues to weave its way, and see how we are all very much connected. And I think you made a point during that interview when you kind of touched upon that notion of like people who are revolutionary, people who are making a difference. Those are the ones that are threatening. So sure enough, he can be painted, as far as Martin Luther King can be painted as a preacher or a pastor or a church person, if you will. But it's only when you become a threat with your revolutionary ideas or perceptions and trying to put those into play where it's like the system will push back. Because there's preachers, pastors all over the place, but if you're not pushing an agenda that goes against or is bringing something that is threatening, then it's like you need to be silenced, you need to be prisoned, you need to be assassinated. Those are the people we need to pay more attention to and probably look into what their message was truly all about. And as you stated, I learned a bit more even in that interview as far as that nonviolence movement. I too was one that if I were to be a revolutionary back in the day.
I know you. I worked with you. And I've seen you in action.
I was more on the, you know, Malcolm X standpoint, and not to take anything away from Dr. King and his mission and his work, but if I wanted to like put my energy behind something, I think I would have been more in alignment with Malcolm X, if you will. But that whole principle way of living and the courage that it takes to live a principled life in the face of all the adversity, in face of all of the challenges that we see on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, man, that's deep. Yeah. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I was using the word visionary and not revolutionary really for a reason, because Martin Luther King was a visionary. He really was doing something different than a lot of people, even people in the nonviolent movement per se, in America, in Black America at that time, fighting for civil rights, even didn't necessarily agree with him and were really kind of threatened by him and what he was doing. And that's visionary. But he was a pastor. It wasn't just that he was being painted as a pastor. He was a pastor. He was in the church. And that's not necessarily revolutionary, because the church has controlled a lot of the social movements and community, even organization that has been done in our communities in America. And he used that, but he used that to really kind of be visionary and bring about, change. And it's important to point out the difference, because even if we want to, because we don't want to belittle the contribution he made and the intelligence that he did represent. Just like we don't want to belittle Malcolm X, even though revolutionary wise, he wasn't that revolutionary, because he was standing under the flag of one of the big religions that's everywhere. Islam is everywhere. So, but he still was visionary. He still was very captivating. He still was very charismatic. He still had a power in organizing people and touching people's hearts, and it's interesting to see how both of them in some form or fashion have some of their philosophies that continue to influence communities. But with this episode, we are closing our series on community protection. We are closing our series on community protection, community defense. Not because we found out that Chicago is not in the top 20 and it's not needed. No, don't think that's why. We closing because we just want to get to other topics and explore other work around Chicago, other activism. But it has been a very good series, and I'm sure at some point, just as responsible, caring mothers and fathers in Chicago, we will come back to the safety of Chicago on some level at some time in the future. But we will be looking to return to, of course, what we're doing throughout the year, celebrating 25 years that the Earth Center has been active in Chicago in the next episode, and then from there we will go into a new series. I'll wait to announce what that series will be about until we get there. So thank you all for joining us. As always, it's a pleasure to assist in the efforts of that investigation of what's going on in our community, what's going on in our city, what we can get behind, what we can look into to bring us the resources that we need, bring us the inspiration that we need to join the people that are really trying to make positive change in the city of Chicago and in the nation and around the world. So thank you all again. Until next time.
All right. Till next time.
On the sunny side of the street.
Life can be so sweet on the sunny side of the street. If you don't know by now, I'm talking about Shot Town.